right, so our bowls have reached leather hard at this point. Threw these a little while ago. If you look at the rim of this piece, you can see that it's started to change color a little bit. Now, when I threw it, this is what I was talking about when we were trimming when we were throwing our piece, setting the thickness of where our floor is going to be, where our foot is going to be. Notice that it's thicker at the base than it is on the walls. These walls are the finished thickness. The floor is not the finished thickness because I'm going to still trim this. Now, the other reason why I recommend leaving your floor a little bit thicker is because if our rim is leather hard, the thicker clay is a little softer. So we want this to be a little bit softer than officially leather hard, so that way if we mess it up, we still can clean the surface of our piece up if we trim through the bottom, which is a common thing that happens. All right, so this is the base, okay? And that's the same as this bowl that I'm gonna trim right now. So this is called your chuck, C-H-U-C-K, like Charles, right? This is your chuck that we're going to turn our piece upside down on here. We do that so that it supports the inside of our vessel, and it's, I think, a little bit harder to trim through your piece when you're using a chuck. And then also, if your rim is not on center, which a lot of students' work, not just students' work, a lot of people's work is not perfectly on center. So this lifts the rim off of the wheel head so it doesn't stress out your rim, which then creates cracks. So depending on how soft your bowl is and your chuck, you may need to take a piece of plastic and put it over top of your chuck to keep the clay from sticking to your chuck. Okay, just like that. Now, I'm gonna squeeze it up just a little bit. It's a little bit taller. This is a trial and error thing when you're doing this. You want it to be just like that, so it's resting all the way on the inside, right down here. Okay. So then get the wheel spinning. Okay. First thing you're gonna, actually let's make it off-center. It's pretty darn close to center right now. First thing we're gonna do is we're gonna draw a line on the bottom of our piece so we can see where that centeredness is. If you notice, I'm gonna draw this line a little bit deeper so you can see it. If you notice, it's skinnier here and wider here. So what we wanna do is we wanna make this circle line up with this exterior circle. So take this line, I'm gonna draw a little boop, arrow like that. So we're gonna spin this around towards us, and we're gonna push it that way. You don't need to do too much. Then get rid of that and draw another line. It's closer, but still not centered. It's still a little bit wider here. I'm gonna do it one more time. There we go. We're good. We want this to be concentric with the outside. Pretty darn close. I think there's a little bit of off-centeredness from where I lifted it up. That's what I'm doing. I'm gonna just go with it. If it's within, 1/4 inch, 1/8 inch, you're good to go. Okay, so now we're gonna draw a line where we want the width of our foot to be. There's a lot of variables here depending on the size of your bowl. So ballpark, I like the width of my feet to be a little less than half the width of the rim. So I'm gonna draw that on there. For my type A folks out there, if you wanna break out the ruler, you can do that. I usually don't do that though, I just eyeball that. And that's a little less than half the width of the rim, okay? If you look at like a Korean rice bowl, they may have really, really small feet. Or if you look at like an early American like dog bowl, it may have really, really wide feet. It's so subjective. Use your judgment. The best way to do it is get some bowls under your feet, and no pun intended, and keep trimming the foot until you decide what you like. Okay, now for the trim tool, it should be at an angle like this so that it acts like a knife. Okay, if we're talking about crimes against humanity here, this trim tool, okay, gotta be clean. Make sure there's not a bunch of dry clay on here. It's the Wild West here in the studio, so make sure when you're using our tools, you clean them up when you're done. If you get a dirty trim tool, clean it up before you use it because it will give you lousy trimmed feet. Okay, so I'm gonna turn it at an angle like this so that it slices. Okay. So my left hand is always resting on the top just to keep it in case it flies off, right? So my left thumb is resting on my right hand so that they are braced off of each other, and lightly trimming that off. I'm letting the wheel do the work. So keep in mind, I'm keeping my hand right here at 4 o'clock. Don't let it drift around to like 1 o'clock or whatever. A little bit at a time. Now, if you know that you threw your inside without the ring of shame, then you know that your outside can then also match the inside shape. So I'm not worried about trimming through the base of my piece because the outside is going to match the shape of the inside. So when I'm trimming this, if I hold it at an angle like this, it acts like a rib. If I hold it at an angle like this, it acts like a knife. So once your walls start getting thinner, you don't want to scrape off quite so much. You want to just tidy this up a little bit. Take your time. All right, so now at this point here, this is where you're gonna be tempted to just like call it a day and trim the bottom inside and you're gonna be done. I want you to remember that clay is one of the most archival materials. This piece is going to be around for 10,000 years before it degrades back into clay. So spend the extra 5 minutes making sure it's nice. Okay, so if you can, reach down there and feel the thickness. This feels pretty good. It should be an even thickness the whole way up. If it's thick, then trim a little bit more off. If it's just right, then go with it. If you trimmed through, you'll know because when you lift it off, there'll be a hole where your foot should be. All right, so then get the wheel spinning again, get it back on center. This is where students don't love. They don't love recentering their feet, but let me tell you, it's so much easier to do it now than it is to try to do it when it's a little bit drier. Okay, so now, I feel like that foot is just a little bit too wide, so I'm gonna trim a little bit more off. Use your judgment, trust yourself, you got this. For the width of your rim, the width of your foot. Now at this point here, you can see that I have this trimmed surface. I really like the trimmed surface, so I usually just leave it. But if you want to make it nice and smooth, this is the time to do it. Smooth metal rib. When I say a little bit of water, I mean so little water, just a little tiny bit. You don't want to add a bunch of water to this because it's going to make your foot too soft. Just enough to lubricate the surface, and then it makes it nice and smooth. If you want that perfectly smooth surface, which there's nothing wrong with that. Okay. Now, notice I haven't touched the inside yet. I'm gonna actually, just so we can start fresh for this demo, I'm gonna smooth that so you can clearly see what I'm doing here. All right, so nice and smooth. Now, I want to trim my foot. So I'm going to draw a line about where I want that, right there. And I'm not going to go past that. I'm going to keep that line, and I'm going to do my very best to not trim that. So I'm going to use the point end of my trim tool. I'm going to push down and out. A little bit at a time. Take your time. Don't go beyond that line. Ideally, perfect world, this plane should line up with this plane so that it's all one plane. And that means that your walls are nice and even. If I'm looking at this plane is a little bit higher than this. So if I threw the inside of my piece round, then I know that I can trim a little bit more off here. So once you go into, if you're making like little sake bowls or something, you may be able to reach in there and feel that foot. But if it's this size or larger, then you have to just use your judgment and look at the surface and try to get those two surfaces to line up. So then I'm gonna get rid of just a little bit more clay. Okay, don't hate this. So, right now, when I'm trimming the inside of my piece is really when our chuck is doing its heavy lifting, because if my piece is too soft and I'm not using a chuck, if I'm just trimming right on the wheel head, then it's easy to push down too hard and then you have a convex inside, and we don't want that. Okay, so I'm gonna go out a little bit more to that line, to my target line. Notice I haven't touched this surface yet. This surface needs to be higher than this surface. If this is lower than this, your bowl is gonna be wobbly, okay? So make sure that you trim your foot, so the interior part of your foot. I call this the sole, S-O-L-E, but I guess you could also S-O-U-L, because that's really where your craftsmanship comes through, is right now at this point. Because from here on out, for the rest of your life, when you are out at an exhibition or a craft show or something, you're gonna see a bowl and you're gonna pick it up. And the first thing you're gonna do is you're gonna look at the base of the piece. It's just what potters do. So do that for your other potters. Do that for me. Make it nice and smooth, make it nice and clean on the inside. Now, that looks good. What do you think I'm gonna do? I'm gonna lift it up and I'm gonna feel how thin my bottom is. That is just right. It is perfect. I feel good about it. Put it back on there. Get that piece back on center. Don't give up yet. And don't settle for it being close enough to center, because you've trimmed it now. It should be perfectly centered. All right, now at this point here, I'm going to start addressing the very base of my piece. So clean my trim tool off. I'm going to bevel that edge so it has a slight undercut. I'm going to bevel this edge. I'll look at that profile. All right, I don't hate it. I'll trim just a little bit more off. Little tiny bit of water. So little water. Now, I have short fingernails, so I'm going to use my fingernail to define that inside part. I'm going to use the back of my fingernail to burnish that and that. And notice right here, this is still not touched except for when I pass my wire under there. I'm gonna let that go right now because I wanna let this dry until it is bone dry, and then I'm gonna take my fingernail and knock that off. You can, this is the stage where you can really geek out over surface. Know when to say when in all things, but specifically with your feet, right? So that you don't waste a bunch of time trying to smooth something that's just gonna get rough later on when you are sitting on the board. This is important. Have a clean surface to place your piece. Make sure that you don't just stick it on this. If we're talking about crimes against humanity, we're talking about a bunch of those today, right? We're talking about those trim tools and we're talking about this board. If I stick this finished piece on this gnarly board, it's gonna give me a really rough foot. So give yourself a nice clean board. If you must, put it on a paper towel, but keep it on a clean surface. This is when you would also stamp your piece or sign it, and you're done. I don't hate it. If I'm honest, I feel like that foot could be just a little tiny skinnier. It's just a little bit too wide, but I'm gonna let it go. Okay. So, go get on the wheel and wait for your piece to get leather hard. If there's anything that is about being patient, it is trimming the base of your feet. So take your time, wait for it to get leather hard before you start trimming.